Hello and welcome to The Exchange. Today's topic is one we've been wanting to touch on for quite some time. It's an enormous problem in this country and one that just seems to be spiralling out of control.
Australia has been fighting the war on drugs for decades, and especially recently the drug ice. An incredible amount of money has been spent to reduce drug use and keep drugs out of the country, but the war on drugs hasn't seemed to achieve either.
With approximately 2,000 drug-related deaths per year, Australia's war on drugs is at a crisis point. Drug usage continues to become a bigger issue, with many people unhappy with how many lives and dollars are being wasted. Will we ever see an end to this conflict? And how do we combat this war on drugs?
Best known for his campaigns on issues ranging from homelessness, drug abuse, prison reform and social welfare, Order of Australia awardee Les Twentyman joins the panel.
And after working on the front line of drugs issues for many years, John Ryan has spent the last 15 years as CEO of the Penington Institute, which aims to advance health and community safety by connecting substance use research to practical action.
It's great to have you both here with us on The Exchange, gentlemen. Les, if we can just draw from your 30 plus years of experience in this area, have you seen Australia's drug problem getting worse during that time?
Well, at street level for sure, particularly now with the methamphetamine or ice, because it affects so many facets of our community. I mean, children as young as 4 and 5 years of age with post-traumatic stress disorder because of the violence that goes with the culture of that sort of stuff. And the fact that our prisons are full and we're just building more prisons. So we're certainly nowhere near having any sort of effective sort of solution to it.
John, what would you say historically our government has taken in the war against drugs?
Well, they've taken a big hit financially. We're spending a lot of money trying to fight this war. And the Prime Minister himself said last year that we can't win the war on drugs. And then he added, but we have to keep fighting it. The problem with that is we keep fighting it the same way. So we're really doing the same old mistakes again and again and again.
Yes, it seems to be that second end of the comments that cause us a lot of grief. You know, doing the same thing and expecting different results. Insanity. I think Les said in one of our other programs that, I mean, we've got to come at it from the level of giving support in some of these areas with the kids on the street.
I think that's absolutely true, and it's not only the kids on the street, it's people just before that. It's those families that are in crisis that are really neglected by our system. We put nearly 70% of the funding into law enforcement. We put very, very little into actually family support and community support around these issues, and it's in the family and the community that the real effects of drugs are felt. You know, what we see in the prison system, like Les says, we keep building more prisons, we keep expanding our prison population, and all the time the drugs are still most felt in community, and yet we do very little there.
Les, you mentioned before that ice was a big problem. Do you think is that our biggest drug problem at the moment?
Well, to street workers like myself, it is because of the unpredictability of people using it. I mean, I had one of my youth workers a guy who'd been doing okay, but his brother got out of jail, got back into ice. He came in to kill him, and it took 8 police officers and 3 cans of mace to take that person down. And I had a petrol bomb thrown at me by a woman who thought that I was her daughter's drug dealer. So that paranoia and the unpredictability has really put people at the coalface, like the police, the ambos, the health workers and youth workers, you know, we don't know what we're dealing with, a time bomb.
Going back on something that you both, I think, agree on, and that is that if we go into these prisons, which I have had experience of, and so has Rob, we speak to some of these people who, sadly, we've just lost 2 of our most reformed, notorious Australian prisoners, Andrew Chan and Myuran Sukumaran, who both rehabilitated and in a best position to actually speak up on the war against drugs. They would say that there is more money needed to be put into youth workers like Les and people on the ground to help fight in this war?
Look, we've never had a really serious review of the way that we deal with drug use issues in Australia. We keep doing the same thing again and again, and we've never done something like a productivity commission review to look at what's the best bang for our buck. It costs nearly $100,000 per year to lock someone up inside. That doesn't include the cost to their family or the cost to the local community. It doesn't include the cost of them coming back out of jail, often in worse condition than when they
Not
went in.
Not rehabilitated.
Correct, not rehabilitated and really traumatised by being in prison. Prisons are not nice places. They're violent, they're aggressive, they're dangerous. You spend time in that environment and then you come back into the community, you've got more problems than when you started in prison. And we've never actually had a big review, like a Royal Commission or a Productivity Commission review, into how we spend our drug money.
I think it's fascinating. Why do you think government is reluctant to actually seek and to ask people like yourselves who are on the coalface? Why do you think they're reluctant to do that?
Well, I'm afraid to say that there's a lot of political mileage to be had out of driving fear in the community about drugs. Instead of building community capacity to understand drug use issues, to intervene early, what we get often from the political class is a fear campaign.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that at the moment with ICE. I mean, I agree with Les completely. ICE is a huge problem in Australia, but the advertising campaign that's being run by government at the moment is just going to create more fear. We don't need more fear, we need hope.
We need hope, and because there's issues underlying that are making these people go to ICE. Well, what are some of the other drugs? We're hearing about ICE all the time, but is ICE the major problem, or are there still other drugs, Les?
There are. Heroin's sort of comes in and out from time to time. But one of the things we've got to keep in mind, and it's exactly what John's saying, I think the year before last there were 15,000 school kids suspended here in Victoria. Now, they're the ones, 80% of them never get re-engaged with the school, so they're the ones that become the gangs and all that sort of stuff. And I have said to the Federal Parliament Health Committee, you need to have outreach youth workers attached to schools, so they can either help, not only help the person or the school, but also the parents and the community. We don't do that. We just kick them out and just hopefully never see them again, and they roll into the gang stuff.
Kick them out, but then they get locked up.
Exactly.
That's what happens.
Well, I said to 60 prisoners recently on remand, all on very serious charges. I asked them how many of them got fractured education, in other words, left school pre-year 10 or suspended. Every hand went up. I said, how many went into the drug culture? Every hand. I said, how many of you have ever had a job? Only 6 people out of 60 had ever had a job. So the linkages are so... That's why I agree with John. We don't look at all those other things that we could probably address.
So we need prevention rather than this Band-Aid solution, don't we?
Well, we're arresting someone in Australia for drugs every 5 minutes. So every 5 minutes another person's been arrested for drugs, which is ridiculous. And about 70% of those arrests are actually cannabis. So we've got a huge emphasis on cannabis. And the consequences of cannabis use are much less than, for example, ice or heroin for that matter. So our whole system is unbalanced. We put about 3% of the budget into harm reduction, so interventions for people that are already using drugs to reduce the harm. 3%, that's absolutely pathetic.
It's pathetic.
So what we get is a community that's ill-equipped to deal with the issues themselves, and we get this big sort of posturing from politicians suggesting that they'll win the war on drugs, or they'll fight and they'll win, and here's another bust of a ton of methamphetamines. But all of those busts that we hear about, those big commercial quantities, they have no impact on availability. So if you ask drug users, is it easy to get drugs? They'll say yes. It's either easy or very easy. And it's because the profit incentive is so big. There's queues of people wanting to traffic those drugs. So you bust one, but there's lots of others in the queue. And you put them in jail for that matter, and there's other people that will fill the gap that they've left behind.
And what should we be doing then to I guess, demand that our government looks into this issue? I mean, clearly we're not spending our money correctly. Clearly it's not making any difference. How long do we keep going on with this?
It's pretty frustrating, isn't it?
Extremely. Look, and it also, I was recently speaking in Sydney, and someone said to me, oh, well, it's really sort of a socio-low class. And I said, hang on, have a look at one of the most prominent families in Australia. His daughter is addicted and is now, I think, accessory to murder. I mean, it can hit at everyone.
And professionals use cocaine. I mean, the number of people that I've spoken to in high-ranking professions that are taking cocaine, it's
And that's
scary.
the thing about ice as well, and it's very addictive ice, which means that it's, it's country and city, but it's also professionals, blue-collar workers, unemployed people. It really is touching people from all walks of life. I think one of the things we should do is try and have a non-partisan approach to it. Politicians have been bickering about this forever, and the death count from that is really literally body bags. So politicians should really try and pull back and do something to serve the community around drugs, and I think that's why Productivity Commission or Royal Commission would be a way of depoliticising it. It's too easy to do point scoring in this space, and that really should end.
Are we talking in a bubble, though? I mean, is this likely to ever take place?
I'm pleased to say there's lots of senior police who have said we can't arrest our way out of this problem, and there's lots of politicians behind closed doors who have a very sensible approach, but they feel obliged to stick with the party line. And so I think we'll reach a tipping point, and I'm optimistic that we'll reach it sooner rather than later, because it really is insanity.
John, I've read a little bit about what's happening in Portugal in regard to the decriminalisation of drugs. Can you tell us a little about that?
Well, Portugal's actually got some really interesting developments, and it was actually led, of all people, in the 1990s by a Catholic priest. It was the drug czar of Portugal, was a Catholic priest. And what they did was change their way of dealing with drugs. They decriminalised all drug use, personal drug use. So you don't get a criminal conviction for being caught using or possessing a small amount of drugs. What you get is a civil intervention. You get a civil jurisdiction which deals with you as a person and considers all of your needs, whether they're health needs, mental health needs, housing needs or whatever, and deals with them that way rather than involving the courts and the police. And they've had a really very good success rate. No increased drug use no significant increase in drug use, significant decreases in some drug use, significant decrease in HIV, which was a big problem in Portugal, and also decreases in overdose. So they've had a great triumph. We should look to Portugal and other countries for a way forward, not always looking to America, which is the home of the war on drugs, and they're
not succeeding incredibly well either, are they?
No, they're not.
Fascinating. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about this in just a moment. If you'd like to know more, don't forget to head over to our website. We'll be back with Street Talk and more right after this.
Drugs is a global crisis. How do you think we should combat the war on drugs?
Oh, let me think. Oh, it's a difficult question there.
It's a pretty tough question. I guess there's a lot we can really do. I guess it's kind of like a popular culture thing more than anything.
I think maybe we have to work on the little ones, the kids, from early on to make them confident in themselves, maybe.
I think it's very difficult. I think it stems from the home. You have to watch your children as they grow.
Education. Yep, if you can get them at a younger age and put it to them how bad it is, then I think you're halfway there.
More police busts and stuff like that. If you stop the import, then you stop it getting to the street. Education programs would be good too.
I guess you probably have to tackle it in terms of on a local scale and an international scale. So probably locally, I think you'd probably focus on things like fixing unemployment issues. International efforts, probably looking at stemming the flow of drugs between countries.
I think what we're doing at the moment is inefficient, expensive and not working. And kind of what worries me most is that people feel so unhappy that they would need to do that.
I think it's through education and a bit of reality. I don't think it should be through a huge amount of policing and criminalising.
It's very difficult when it's conflated with religion, politics and also global trade in drugs. But clearly what we're doing now is not working in some of them.
Do you think legalisation is an option?
I don't think so.
Like marijuana is legal in quite a few countries and states. I don't know if I'm really supporting that at all. I don't know if that's it's kind of fueling a bit of fire there.
Good work for some of the lighter ones, but at the end of the day, there's some pretty strong stuff out there. can't legalise.
Legalisation probably be a fairly good option.
The way that has been gone about has not been helpful and not worked.
If it's legalised for medical purposes, for health purposes, then let's try going down that line.
So you think legalisation is an option?
Oh yeah, I absolutely do. Yeah, especially for marijuana and some of the soft drugs. You know, stats say that alcohol probably does more damage in our community than even those drugs. I think it's tricky getting stuff on the internet. The HTC values are really high, so kids can really screw themselves up. But yeah, I think what we're doing at the moment is just atrocious.
Welcome back, Sandra. You're in the studio with us now. That question seemed to stump a few people.
Which, the legalisation question?
Yeah, well, both questions.
What
people
do you
go,
do?
well, I don't know.
Exactly. It did. It just put people in look, it's an issue that it has many complexities to it, and I don't think people really know what's the best way. However, education seemed to come through quite a few times, whether that's in schools or in the home.
But even that line, it's a real issue, it's complex, it's affecting our country, it's affecting our kids. Wouldn't that make it of great import that we actually do get our heads around it and understand it?
Absolutely. I mean, we just can't continue to sort of throw money at one end and none at the other, because eventually you'll have more people in prison than you will in the community. I mean, it's...
Well, a number of people said there, well, what we're doing now is not working. So I think there's a realisation that what we're currently doing isn't making a difference, and so obviously something needs to change.
I think that the fact of the matter is we've grown up as a community in the last 20 years dealing with drug use problems. We've seen heroin come and go. The heroin drought, followed, I guess, what was a flood in the 90s, and the thinking was, oh, we've solved the problem. But the drug market keeps changing, and it changes much quicker than governments do, in which case we've got an ice problem now, but we'll have another problem, another drug, down the track. So the issue is we've got to change the system for dealing with it, not just have a drug-specific response.
Well, there's a couple of drugs that are wizard, heard of the wizard one, which is hallucinating, and where kids are jumping off balconies thinking they can fly. And there's another one in the States through Northern Europe called crocodile, where they take all sorts of, and you only got 2 years to live because your skin goes all crocodile-like. So, as John said, heroin went to other things, and pills, all work. So and if you go back, we've always been a drug-consuming society. 1 in 4 women used to take Valium way back in the, the 60s and all that sort of stuff. And the heroin, which was legal up until. And I remember saying one day to a group of Probus people that heroin used to be legal, and this 70-year-old woman jumped up and waved a stick in the air and said that was bloody good stuff too. I woke everyone up, but it was, so it's crazy that it's the law. We have issues with drugs, but we have a big issue with the law. The law is an S.
John, they mentioned about imports. How big an issue are imports of drugs?
Well, most of it comes internationally. So ice is mostly now driven by imports. Heroin was always the same. Some drugs are mostly grown here, such as cannabis, but cocaine, etc., is imported. And we can never stop the imports because of the scale of other things that are coming in, and the camouflage opportunities are just too huge. We would need an enormous, impossible amount of money to stop the flow of drugs coming in through our just regular importation system. So it's an impossible hope that we can stop the flow.
So we need to stop the demand?
We have to absolutely reduce the demand, and we have to reduce especially when it gets problematic, we've got to reduce the level of addiction. We never treated the heroin problem properly, which has left over people that are switching from heroin to ice. Now we've got ice problems. We'll have second generation ice kids. Hawaii's already got it. They've got parents using ice and their kids using ice. We'll have the same thing.
So something needs to be done, and what we're doing now is not working. We're going to come up with hopefully a few solutions when we get back from the break. Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you. Thank you.
And don't forget, if you'd like to see more of Sandra and Street Talk, you can head over to theexchangetv.com.au. Back with more right after this. Welcome back. We're discussing Australia's drug problem with Les Twentyman and John Ryan. Gentlemen, just very quickly, I want to get to your comments on what you think is the best way forward with the drug problem in Australia. Les?
Well, I think we've got to look at education at a very early age. We've got to also give kids a sense of belonging. Get kids into sport, particularly team sports, where they develop structures and sense of belongings. It's the kids that are sort of isolated and become depressed, and they're the ones that become the targets.
Yeah. John?
Look, I think we've got to destigmatise the issue. We've got to actually talk about it honestly. We've got to talk about it like this program is doing now. That's the most important step forward, because it's too much swept under the carpet, which means that people are scared to seek help, which means that their problems get worse.
So it brings shame on the family, and we want to cover the whole thing up.
Shame doesn't work in this space. What it does is create more problems.
Yeah.
And the other thing is putting your head under the sand doesn't work either. And I've had that situation with mothers at the school say, well, it doesn't come near any of our family. I'm like, no, actually, I doubt that there's any 14-year-old around that hasn't had some conversation around drugs. Talking of which, as parents, how can we educate ourselves on, if we're checking our kids' social media and we could find out, for example, that they're talking, I've heard about the drug wizard, but some of the other names that we might want to, ways of people talk about it?
Well, it's a really good question, and it's a really difficult answer, because everyone's got their own code words, and code words can change even in a small social group. So you've got to be much more savvy. There's some common, something like cannabis might be called green. What an innocuous word. You really got to be sort of contemporary with that language, but you've also got to know that social networks will have their own language, and so puff in one social network might mean ice, but it might be Tina to another social network. The code language is part of the problem, which is that it's all secret.
Yeah, like when heroin was around, you used to have things like Jason, are you Jason? Which are you chasing? And all that sort of stuff. And that's with methamphetamine, like in America, it's called crank. New Zealand, it's called P, and it can change, from one suburb to the other, and that's exactly what.
So we need to keep educating ourselves on this. Is there anywhere near enough discussion about this issue, and particularly parents with their children within families?
Look, it's you have life education in places like that who take caravans in, but it's. I think the police took me around Victoria for 3 days, and. The crowds that we drew in places like Nil, and that, they expected about 100. We got 450 people at one place. People are really scared because communities are becoming so captive to it. And what having public forums, I believe, helps is it gives the people a sense of empowerment that the whole town accepted they've got a problem, and together, police, youth workers, educators, health people, all working for the one common thing.
Yeah, that's good.
John, education in families, how can families best
Look, I
address
think
it?
education is really important. GPs in country towns are really important. The police keep saying that they're part of the solution, not the entire solution. I think that honest conversation at the family level and the community level is really needed. And Les is right. The crowds actually flock to hear about these issues because they fear drugs. But they should actually have hope that there's ways to deal with it. You can recover, for example, from ice use. It's a hard and long journey, but you can recover and rejoin the community.
Wonderful. So I'm glad there is hope there. And I think what the takeaway here is working together, churches, charities, different religious organisations, sporting organisations, government, police, everyone working together, and we can actually win this war.
That's right. We're all on the same team, just playing different positions.
Yes.
Yeah,
well
exactly.
said. Les, John, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget, we'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas on what's important to you and what you think we should address on this program. Hope you can join us next time.
See you then.